do you mean? That government should be open and for the people and responsive to the people.
Government has an obligation to be transparent. It also has an obligation, I think, to prepare citizens with certain levels of literacy and a fundamental quality of education so that they can do their job as citizens, to engage in their civic responsibility of holding government policy. You have First Amendment rights of the speaker and of the listener. That the First Amendment basically is intended to promote democracy, or better, a higher quality of democracy.
The NCMR is now on hiatus. The wing of GBH that would go record events like this in the public interest doesn't have money right now. So this is how bad the situation is. Okay, that's more questions. Sorry, okay, camera person.
Do I have the panel's permission to videotape this session today?
Yes.
All right, I just wanted to
revolution, why not, and what would they look like?
That's a big question. I don't necessarily, I mean, no one to define this better, but I don't necessarily see those two as mutually exclusive, of reform and revolution. And particularly as a center that has, a dozen or 2 dozen projects running simultaneously, one project can do one while another does the other. What was the second part of your question?
Are you developing the tools? If not, why not? And what would they look like?
It's a very fair question. Yeah, I'm sure. Well, the best I can do is give you another example of a really great project that was done in the wake of the BP oil spill. So we have a media lab. I don't know if he's graduated now at this point. I think he's a fellow now, so he graduated from the media lab, named Jeffrey Warren, who created a project called Grassroots Mapping. Now, Jeffrey's background was in camera hacking, for one thing, where he knew how to mess with cameras and get them to not only show visual images, but infrared images. So you just take a regular camera that you buy at Best Buy, whatever, and be able to mess with it to show different kinds of imagery. Then he figured out ways to tie those cameras to inexpensive weather balloons. And then he met up with people, with shrimp boat captains in the Gulf Coast in the wake of the oil spill, and went out there and was able to document exactly where the oil was, even if it wasn't totally visible on the surface of the water, because of the way the light bounced off it. And show in the infrared where it was. That kind of tool, he just was having fun. He wanted to figure out a way if he could make his own better than Google satellite imagery by setting up a cheap weather balloon and a cheap camera and a few pieces of string and mash the shutter button down and just take pictures. And then he wrote incredibly complicated code that would stitch all those images together into a large image. But those images in the Gulf are now part of the public record. It's not something that a satellite company owns. And it's something that those shrimp boat captains in the years down the line are going to use in lawsuits against BP or the company that owned the oil rig. So that's why, it's almost, so reform or revolution, in our case, it's almost neither, because it was someone messing around with media and then finding the right people at the right time to be able to explore an opportunity with it.
Yes, okay. I don't understand this thing about the right to a large audience, and we may have to maybe rework this a little bit so someone of my simple nature can understand this. When I hear that, I'm thinking it's 1984 and Winston Smith can't turn off the telescreen. So I'm 99.99% sure that that's not what you mean by the right to a large audience.
Let's say a right to an audience. I think it's implied by the First Amendment in that you have First Amendment rights of the speaker and of the listener. That the First Amendment basically is intended to promote democracy, or better, a higher quality of democracy. That the role of citizen in a democracy is to keep government accountable and they can only do that by having information enough to know particularly about what government is doing. Government has an obligation to be transparent. It also has an obligation, I think, to prepare citizens with certain levels of literacy and a fundamental quality of education so that they can do their job as citizens, to engage in their civic responsibility of holding government power. If citizens lack sufficient information in a representative democracy such as we have, they can't delegate their responsibility to others with knowing consent. It then becomes manufactured consent, and we're all being manipulated. So that's not really a true democracy. The marketplace itself talks about an invisible hand, but so long as these firms have all of this information, better information than we have on how we're going to make our decision, it's not an invisible hand. It's a spotlight on that hand, directing it to what button to push to make us respond in a certain way.
It was Cairo. He was like, we read this there. I said, Cairo. He was like, oh my God. And the ministry, I think one of the major buildings was set on fire.
Difficult, but not impossible.